In 552 CE, two monks walked out of China carrying bamboo walking canes. Inside those hollow canes were silkworm eggs, the most protected industrial secret on Earth. Revealing the secret of silk was punishable by death. But these monks were not ordinary travelers. They were spies sent by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian to commit the greatest act of corporate espionage the ancient world had ever seen. They succeeded. Those stolen eggs became the foundation of Europe's silk industry, generating fortunes in Florence and Lyon for centuries to come. But silk was only the beginning. For thousands of years, the Silk Road carried not just goods, but secrets. Technologies so advanced that when Europe finally got hold of them, it changed the course of human history. And then, conveniently, Europe forgot where they came from. Welcome back to Silk Road Annals. Today, we are tracing 12 world-changing technologies that traveled the Silk Road from east to west, and how the West claimed them as its own. Act 1. Secrets of Knowledge. Papermaking. Before we talk about what was written, we need to talk about what it was written on. In medieval Europe, the main writing surface was parchment, stretched, scraped animal skin. A single Bible required the hides of hundreds of sheep. Books were rarer than gold. Meanwhile, China had already solved this problem. In 105 CE, a court official named Kai Lun perfected a method of making paper from mulberry bark, hemp, and rags. Cheap, lightweight, revolutionary. And China guarded this secret fiercely for over 600 years. Then, in 751 CE, everything changed. At the Battle of Talas River, in what is now Kazakhstan, Islamic Abbasid forces defeated a Tang dynasty army and captured Chinese papermakers among the prisoners. The secret was out. Within decades, massive paper mills appeared in Samarkand and Baghdad. The Islamic world used this cheap material to build the House of Wisdom, a center of learning with hundreds of thousands of paper books, at a time when European monasteries hoarded a few dozen manuscripts on animal skin. Paper finally reached Europe through Islamic Spain in the 11th century. By the time Europeans began calling themselves the world's great educators, they were 1,000 years late to the classroom. Movable type, printing paper was nothing without a way to fill it. And this is where one of history's biggest misattributions begins. When we think of the printing press, we picture Johannes Gutenberg in 1450, sparking the Renaissance. But here is the question nobody asks. How could Gutenberg invent a concept that had already been perfected 4 centuries earlier on the other side of the world? During China's Northern Song dynasty, around 1040 CE, an artisan named Sheng created the world's first movable type system. He carved individual characters into clay, baked them hard, and arranged them in an iron frame secured with pine resin and wax. The polymath Shen Kuo recorded that for printing hundreds of copies, Sheng's method was, in his words, marvelously quick. In 1377, Korea advanced the technology further, printing the jigji using cast bronze type, 73 years before Gutenberg set up his workshop. Now, to be clear, Gutenberg's contribution was genuine. He developed oil-based ink, invented the hand mold for casting individual Latin letters, and adapted the screw press. These were real innovations, but the fundamental concept, arranging reusable characters to mass-produce text, was not his idea. It was an Eastern one, refined and adapted for a Western alphabet. Algebra and the concept of zero. Paper and printing spread words, but behind every great civilization is a language even more powerful than words: mathematics. Before the Silk Road exchanged ideas, Europe relied on Roman numerals. Try doing long division with Roman numerals. It is practically impossible. The mathematical revolution that made modern science possible began not in Europe, but in India. Indian mathematicians Aryabhata and Brahmagupta were the first to conceptualize zero. not as a blank space, but as a real number with mathematical value. They created the decimal system we still use today. These numbers traveled west to the Abbasid court in Baghdad in the 8th century. There, the Persian mathematician al-khwarizmi combined Indian numerals with Greek logic and wrote a groundbreaking book, Kitab al-Jabr. That title is literally the origin of the word algebra, and al-Khwarizmi's own name. It gave us the word algorithm. In 1202, the Italian mathematician Fibonacci encountered this number system through North African merchants and brought it to Europe. The West later labeled these Arabic numerals, stripping away their Indian origin entirely, and eventually folded advanced mathematics into the narrative of European genius. Act 2. Secrets of War. Damascus Steel. Leave the library. Step onto the battlefield. Because the technologies that truly terrified Europe were forged in fire. During the Crusades, European knights encountered swords unlike anything they had ever seen. These blades had a mesmerizing, wavy surface pattern. They were said to be sharp enough to split a European helmet, yet delicate enough to slice a falling silk handkerchief in mid-air. The Crusaders called them Damascus steel. But here is the twist. Damascus was just the marketplace. The steel itself came from much further east, from South India. Since at least the mid-1st millennium BCE, metallurgists in regions like Golconda and Karnataka had mastered a technique called crucible steel. They sealed black magnetite ore together with carbon-rich bamboo and leaves inside small clay crucibles. Then they fired them in massive furnaces. The result was an ultra-high carbon steel with extraordinary properties, a material Europe could not replicate for over 1,000 years. In the 19th century, the great scientist Michael Faraday tried to reverse engineer this Indian steel. He failed. When Benjamin Huntsman patented the crucible steel process in England in 1740, historians now recognize he was drawing heavily on earlier reports of Indian metallurgy. Gunpowder steel could win a battle, but gunpowder could win a war. In 9th century China, Taoist monks were mixing chemicals in search of an elixir of immortality. In one of history's greatest ironies, they instead created the most destructive substance the world had ever known. By 1044, Chinese military manuals, including the Wujing Zongyao, were already publishing precise formulas for explosive bombs and fire lances. The Mongol Empire later carried this technology westward, using it to devastating effect across Eurasia. In the West, the English philosopher Roger Bacon is often credited with discovering gunpowder in 1267. But modern scholarship shows Bacon was translating and recording formulas that missionaries brought back from the East. The evidence is hard to ignore. 13th century Arab texts referred to the key ingredient, saltpeter, as Chinese snow. Europe took the Chinese explosive, engineered superior cannons around it, and then sailed those cannons back across the world to colonize the very civilizations that had invented the powder inside them. The magnetic compass. Gunpowder conquered land, but to cross the ocean, you needed to know where you were going. The age of discovery, Columbus, Magellan, the mapping of the globe, would have been a suicide mission without the magnetic compass. For centuries, Italian tradition credited a man named Flavio Gioia from the port of Amalfi with inventing the compass around 1300. There is just one problem. Modern historians have confirmed that Flavio Gioia never existed. He was a Renaissance-era myth. The real compass story begins in China, over 1,000 years before Amalfi. During the Han Dynasty, the Chinese carved lodestone into spoon shapes that naturally pointed south, resting them on bronze plates. Initially, these were tools for feng shui and divination. But by the 11th century, Song dynasty scientists had discovered how to magnetize iron needles and float them in bowls of water, creating navigational instruments that guided massive treasure fleets through the darkest nights on the maritime Silk Road. Arab traders adopted the technology. By the late 12th century, it had filtered into the Mediterranean, and from there, it powered every European voyage that followed. Act 3. Secrets of Life. The Qanat system. Now leave the battlefield and the ocean. Walk into a bone-dry desert where the sun boils the earth, and somehow find a constant stream of ice-cold water flowing beneath your feet. This was the Qanat, a subterranean aqueduct developed by ancient Persians around 550 BCE during the Achaemenid Empire. Specialized engineers called muqanis dug deep mother wells at mountain foothills to tap into underground aquifers. Then they carved tunnels, stretching for dozens of kilometers, to carry that water to arid plains. Because the tunnels ran underground, the water never evaporated. And here is the engineering detail that still astonishes modern hydrologists. The muqanis calculated tunnel slopes at less than a single degree of decline. Water flowed continuously, entirely by gravity. No pumps, no moving parts, just geometry and patience. This technology spread along the Silk Road to North Africa, was adopted by the Spanish, and traveled with colonizers to the Americas. Cities from Madrid to Mexico owe their water infrastructure to principles first engineered in the Persian desert, though Western history books rarely acknowledge it. Anesthesia and surgical pain relief. Engineering could move water, but could Eastern knowledge stop pain? Open any Western medical textbook and it will tell you that painless surgery began in Boston in 1846 with the public demonstration of ether. Before that, the story goes, patients simply endured the knife. That story is incomplete. In 2nd century China, the legendary surgeon Hua Tuo was performing major abdominal operations using a herbal wine formula called Mafei San to render patients completely unconscious. Centuries later, during the Islamic Golden Age, the Persian physician Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, refined what was called the soporific sponge. It was a sponge soaked in a mixture of sedatives, including opium and hyoscyamus, dried in the sun, then moistened and held over the patient's nose to induce deep sleep before surgery. This knowledge actually traveled to Europe. It was taught at the medical school of Salerno in southern Italy as early as the 12th century. But over the following centuries, church suspicion of Islamic medical practices and a broader cultural hostility toward Eastern knowledge contributed to these techniques falling out of use in Europe, leaving patients to suffer through centuries of fully conscious surgery before the West rediscovered what the East had known all along. Variolation, the precursor to vaccines. Stopping pain was one thing, but what about stopping death itself? In 1796, the English doctor Edward Jenner created the smallpox vaccine, one of the most important medical breakthroughs in history. He is rightly celebrated. But Jenner was building on a practice that had traveled the Silk Road for centuries: variolation. By the 10th century, Chinese physicians had observed that smallpox survivors never caught the disease again. So they developed an audacious technique. They took scabs from patients with mild cases of smallpox, ground them into fine powder, and blew the powder into healthy patients' noses through a silver tube. It triggered a mild infection that granted lifetime immunity. The practice spread westward across the Silk Road to the Ottoman Empire, where doctors performed it by scratching the skin. In 1721, a British aristocrat named Lady Mary Workley Montagu witnessed the procedure in Istanbul and brought the technique back to London, decades before Jenner's famous experiment, the crankshaft and camshaft. Medicine saved individual lives, but the next secret would reshape the entire physical world. When we imagine the origins of complex machinery, we picture Leonardo da Vinci's sketchbooks or the steam engines of industrial Britain. But long before da Vinci was born, A 12th century Muslim polymath named Ismail al-Jazari was serving as chief engineer in the Artukid court in what is now southeastern Turkey. In 1206, al-Jazari published the Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices. Inside it, he documented the world's first known crankshaft and camshaft mechanisms, the devices that convert circular motion into linear motion. This is the foundational technology behind every car engine and every automated factory line operating today. Al-Jazari was not just a theorist. He built programmable humanoid robots that served drinks at royal banquets. He designed automated musical bands powered entirely by water. And many of Leonardo da Vinci's celebrated mechanical drawings, created 300 years later, bear a documented resemblance to the diagrams in al-Jazari's book. Windmills. Al-Jazari's machines harnessed the power of water, but on the other side of the Persian plateau, engineers were harnessing something even more invisible: the wind. Picture a windmill and your mind goes straight to the Netherlands. Green fields, tulips, spinning blades. But the windmill was not born in Holland. The first windmills appeared in the Sistan region, on the border of modern-day Iran and Afghanistan, between the 7th and 9th centuries. The winds there blew with extreme, punishing force in a single direction. So Persian engineers designed vertical axis windmills, structures made of lightweight wood and reeds, to grind grain and pump water from deep underground. This technology traveled the Silk Road into the Middle East, reached Islamic Spain, and eventually moved north into Europe. European engineers adapted the design by flipping the axis horizontal to catch shifting, multi-directional winds. The adaptation was clever, but the core idea, capturing invisible energy to do human work, was Persian. Closing. The bamboo canes. Paper, printing, numbers, steel, gunpowder, compasses, water systems, anesthesia, vaccines, machines, windmills, and silk. 12 technologies. Each one traveled the Silk Road from east to west. Each one transformed the civilization that received it. And almost every one was eventually absorbed into a narrative that credited Europe alone. The so-called European miracle was never a solo performance. It was the final act in a relay race that stretched across continents and centuries, from Chinese artisans and Indian metallurgists to Persian engineers and Arab scholars. And it all comes back to those two monks walking out of China in 552 CE with hollow bamboo canes. They thought they were smuggling silk. They were really carrying proof that no empire innovates alone, and no empire likes to admit it. If you found value in this journey, subscribe to Road Annals. There are many more buried truths waiting along the road.